Thank you.
Chairman Graham, Ranking Member Feinstein, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Chimene Keitner. I hold a chair in international law at UC Hastings Law School in San Francisco. I've also served proudly as counselor on international law at the Department of State, where I worked on matters including foreign sovereign immunity. I offer this testimony solely on my own behalf, and I'd like to offer 3 points today. First, the United States has more to lose than any other country by removing the shield of foreign sovereign immunity for a pandemic. And I'm reassured to hear, Senator Graham, that you appreciate this fully, as you indicated this is a difficult decision to make. Second, private litigation will not bring China to the negotiating table, and it will not produce answers or compensation for US victims. And so I'm afraid my colleague, Professor Miller, is mistaken in the premise of the argument, as is Attorney General Fitch, that such a process in domestic courts would produce the desired result. If it would, we might entirely be justified in having a different balance of a cost-benefit analysis here. Instead, Congress should focus on the inadequate federal response to COVID-19 and on restoring US leadership in global public health. And again, I'm delighted that my colleague, Professor Miller, endorses that goal as well. Now, let me be clear at the outset, I am not here to defend China. My purpose in joining you here today is to help protect the United States. My testimony would be virtually identical if the pandemic had originated in any other country. My points about sovereign immunity are neither original nor controversial, nor should they be viewed as partisan, and I'll address them in turn. First, the United States has the most to lose in removing sovereign immunity for a pandemic. The principle of foreign state immunity does not absolve any country from legal responsibility for its wrongdoing, and that's an essential point to emphasize. It also does not prevent the United States from imposing serious consequences on foreign countries for violating our mutual obligations. It does not compel, let alone countenance, a quote-unquote diplomatic blind eye, as the Attorney General called it. What it does prevent is non-consensual litigation against one country in another country's courts. Instead, we do resolve disputes through diplomacy, including coercive diplomatic measures, and in international tribunals whose jurisdiction is based on consent. Because of our unparalleled global footprint, the United States has the most to lose from weakened immunity rules. And indeed, the 1976 Act that Senator Feinstein referred to does contain 2 exceptions. I'd be glad to explain in questions why those do not apply here. We might be on the receiving end of a virus today, but we could easily be on the exporting end of a different virus tomorrow. My second point, as I mentioned earlier, is that private litigation will not force China to negotiate, and it will not provide answers or compensation. Instead, it will give false hope to US victims and tie us up in years of counterproductive litigation at the expense of US taxpayers in US courts. In addition, recall President Trump's effusive praise of China's initial response, which included thanking President Xi in late January on behalf of the American people. If lawsuits against China proceed, you can be sure that his remarks will be cited in China's defense. This is just one of many hurdles these lawsuits would face. The causal chain, as you have heard, has dozens, if not hundreds of additional links. In this respect, and in many others that I'd be happy to go into, it is fundamentally different from the Trail smelter case. Creating exceptions to sovereign immunity, including from attachment and execution, as one of the proposed bills would do, would not compel China to negotiate. But using these complaints in US courts as a lever to force negotiations is like using a stick of dynamite to try to put out a forest fire. As the tireless work of our own public health officials has shown, detecting, reporting, and containing pathogens are routine and essential government functions. These are precisely the sorts of functions that foreign state immunity covers under both international and US domestic law. This brings me to my final point, which is that we must focus on our domestic response and restoring our global leadership. A crisis of this proportion demands that we focus on actions that will help the American people. I strongly support the call for an international independent investigation and for a bipartisan panel, as has been proposed, akin to the 9/11 Commission. Such a commission would show the world that we are confident enough and candid enough to confront a crisis without resorting to the kind of concealment and buck passing more often associated with authoritarian regimes. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.